Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 188th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Thank you, everybody, always for listening and taking part, sending in questions, all that stuff. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. Get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns 3 times a week for the Boston Sports Journal and do a Q&A each week with the subscribers. So go and subscribe at Boston Sports Journal as well. Some great stuff over there. With me this week is the Boston Herald, Steve Conroy. Steve, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, like kicking back, getting some stuff done around the house, doing a little Providence Bruins playoffs. I was not at the draft lottery press conference with Don Sweeney earlier this week because I had a prior engagement going on. I don't know if it was Little League or hockey or what the hell it was, but I was doing something else. But we're going to get to all that stuff. Before we get into it, though, I just want to let everybody know that for those of you listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and leave a review and if you do like it. And for those watching the show on CLNS, enjoying all this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the very exact instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right, let's get into it, Steve. First things first, your reactions to the Bruins getting the 7th overall pick. I talked a little bit about it with Mick a couple days ago. I had the sneaking suspicion, just based on the way things had gone for the Bruins, right, this entire season, and them like getting that final point against New Jersey on the last game of the year, that might end up like coming into play a little bit as far as, pushing them down a little. And it did significantly change the percentages as far as what they could get and where they might land, getting that one individual point. I will lead into the question, though, with this message we got from somebody named Dazzle Ron on Twitter. And this is, I believe, the dark side. I'll read at least one dark side question from the fans, where we're gonna put it in perspective that there are some pissed off fans out there. So I will put that disclaimer out there before I read this. Joe, does it really matter where we pick? The player is destined to be a minor leaguer for life. I think that's way too strong. I feel badly for whoever gets drafted at 7. They are doomed for failure, and Sweeney and Neely will make sure that is reality. Probably an angry season ticket holder right there. I will say,
not happy with this 4% bump, huh?
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think that fan loved Kevin Paul DuPont's question in the press conference with Charlie Jacobs and Cam and Dottie, if they were going to rescind the 4% bump. But I will say, like, the number 7 overall pick, last 10 years, Clayton Keller, Quinn Hughes, I think it was Mitchkov last year. Like 7, there's been some misses there, but there's been some very good players that have been selected at the number 7 spot. So the Bruins, by percentages, not even like taking anything else into play, have a really good chance, especially in a draft that seems like it's very center strong in the first round, has a chance to get a really good player here and somebody that's going to help fit their needs, a few years down the road.
Yeah, I think Lars Jonsson was also number 7 too, wasn't he?
Yes.
So, yeah, it looks like they'll be able to get a center. Whether that's the best player available at that point, who knows? But after Schaefer and Misa, I've seen a million different, mock drafts, which,
Yep.
has, players. Some have Hagens at 3.
Yep.
Others have Caleb Desnoyers at number 3.
Yep.
I kind of like Desnoyers with with his history of winning and all that.
Yep.
But yeah, they should get somebody who's good. I don't think anybody. I don't even think Schaefer is going to be an impact player next year for any team.
Right. And, there's a couple other names out there that you've heard a lot too, right? Jake O'Brien seems to be a fast riser, playmaking, power play kind of guy at center that, some of his skills that he brings to the table definitely would translate and are things the Bruins need. And there's also Roger McQueen, who I think
the back injuries scare me.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the one that is the risk, right? That's the high risk pick if they go that route. He was limited to what was it, like 10 games this past year because of a back injury. 6'5", big kid that's supposed to be one of those big-bodied centers with a lot of offensive upside. And Sweens went and saw him in person, which tells you that at least they're seriously looking at him and they wanted to get eyes on him. You know, if they're gonna even entertain like a risky pick with a guy that's had some injuries and had a big injury this year. And Denoye, like I think when you look at him, he screams out to me like a Jonathan Taves, Patrice Bergeron, two-way type, healthy, solid, does everything well, like kind of the exact mold of what they probably want. You know,
he may he may not be the lead dog point producing center,
right?
But he could very well be, the Patrice Bergeron to David Krejci,
right.
And Patrice was kind of surpassed Krejci as the number one center, as the years went on. But I think that was mostly because Krejci didn't have a right wing for a long time or left wing for a long time.
Yep.
And but he's that guy who's as a scout, described to me. He's the guy you want on the ice protecting a lead with a minute left.
Yeah, no, he's going to be one of those players that's going to be one of your best players, play in all situations, have trust in him, like smart play. Like that's what it feels like when you talk to people about him, when you see some of the clips of him. Anton Frondell, I think is that his name? Yeah. Interesting player as well, and he's another one that's a center that maybe they're going to move him to wing eventually. Looks like he can really shoot rockets with the puck. Is already playing second division pro in Sweden. So like you put all of these names in there, like one of these guys is going to be available for the Bruins at number 7, maybe even a couple of them. So they'll have chances to really lock up somebody that could be a center for a long time with that pick, with the McQueen one being the only one that I think there's a lot of level of concern about. And high upside, very high risk pick at that point in the draft. Where if it comes down to that guy is available and they like him, I guess the overall question, Stephen, we've talked about this a lot, is just, now that we know where the pick is, it's number 7. Now we sort of are getting a little bit more into like the players that might be available and who it's going to be and who could be there. Like, and when you look at the Bruins history, and I put all of it together, like Kevin KPD asked the question about the draft and development, and Cam was pretty defensive about it, answering it at the end of the season press conference. And there's evidence for both ends, right? Like it is, while it is true that they've traded a lot of first round picks, some of it is a crapshoot. They've picked at the end of the first round a lot, which is a lot more of a crapshoot than a top 10 pick. They have traded players to other teams that they drafted, Ryan Lindgren, guys like that. Vladar left. Like there's NHL players that they've produced over the last 10 or so years that didn't end up playing for the Bruins. All that stuff is true, but at the same time, like you also can't deny they've missed on a lot of the first round picks. Uro Vakanainen, Johnny Beecher, and there's been players, if you go back and look, there are players immediately after they got picked that were very good NHL players, which tells you they missed. Like they were looking at a group of players, they picked that guy when they should have picked the other guys. And some of that is hindsight being 20/20, and some of that is they missed the pick. Where do you land on confidence level with them making the pick, where they are draft and development wise? I think they've gotten better over the last few years, and they've continued to distance themselves from the 2015 draft, where they obviously made some mistakes in the first round. But I'm not fully confident that they're going to nail this based on past history. Like I think they should, because it's a 7th overall pick, and like you're picking some very good players at that point. But there's a part of me that looks at it and says, man, if they miss this, like there's going to be hell to pay. There's a lot of pressure on them to get this right and to get a player that's going to be a good, productive player, an all-star level player for 10 plus years for the Bruins.
Yeah, I mean, they can't miss this pick. And the thing is, you won't know if it's a miss immediately.
Right.
This is not, there are not a lot of guys, at least from what I can see, there are not maybe any guys in this draft who are going to jump into the NHL next year and play a major role. So,
Yep.
On this pick, you're going to have a little bit of patience. But yeah, they can't miss it. That 2015, and Cam brought up 2015 without,
Right.
being prompted.
Right.
I mean, that's obvious how much that draft has haunted this organization.
Yep.
And they went for a defenseman with Jacob Zaboral with that first pick.
Yep.
And he blew out his knee, so he might have been a player. But they also had Thomas Chabot, who was a teammate
Right.
of Zaboral, in junior that they passed on.
Yeah, I'm not going to fully buy into the injuries like derailing Zboril. I just don't think Zboril is as good as Chabot, and he certainly wasn't. He was a tier below. All the Provorov, Werenski, Hanifin, like all those guys that got picked right before him. He was clearly below those guys.
Yes, everybody, obviously he was. The Bruins sort of admitted it by saying that they were, were trying to move up.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, they can't miss on this pick, and that was Zaboral was 13, and this is 7, so they should be able to get a player here.
Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Join over 10 million users and get started today. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. It is fun. It is super simple. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. On Prize Picks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports. Combine your favorite hockey player with players from baseball, basketball, esports, and so much more. Here's some picks for this week. Matthew Tkachuk, more than 0.5 goals per game. Alexander Barkov, more than 20.25 minutes time on ice. Sam Bennett, more than 3.5 hits. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on Prize Picks. They also offer Venmo, MasterCard, and Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. I mean, I also, like with Letourneau, like people want to jump all over that pick and already say that they missed on that one or that guy's going to be a bust. Like 1 year into it, when he's 19 years old, he was playing for a loaded Boston College team, and I think he falls under the radar or under the heading of like exactly the kind of players you're talking about, where it's going to take a few years for that kid to figure out who he is, what he is, how to be successful, like just grow into the player that he's going to be. And I think the Bruins knew that when they picked him. I think they knew that he was kind of raw and it was going to take years for him to turn into whatever he's going to be. I mean, Hagens had a good season at BC, but I think he didn't have the dominant season people expected him to have because he was playing on a loaded team that had a ton of really good players. There's only like one puck to go around. And I think Letourneau was playing in a role where you weren't going to necessarily see him turn it up the dial offensively either. So like, I'm not going to like get all over them and jump, pile on with Letourneau. I think he's a guy that I want to see a little bit more this year at Boston College and see how he develops and see what he looks like at development camp before you really like make a determination.
Yeah. It's almost a miracle that he didn't score a goal, off his backside or something.
Right.
Because I watched, maybe a handful of BC games this year, and he seemed to be around it a lot. He seemed to be, hunted pucks pretty well. It was a big jump for him going from that level that he was playing in prep school in Canada to Division I college hockey. So I'd like to give it another year before we say they blew that pick.
Yeah, and I think he also he had to recalibrate too. Like he's a confident kid coming out of prep school, he dominated, and like he
I don't think he quite appreciated how big a jump he was making.
I don't think he did
Yeah.
when he was already counting how many years it was going to be that he was going to leave BC when we were talking to him after the draft.
Yeah.
And in the back of my head, I was saying, like, he has no idea what he's headed into at Boston College at Hockey East, especially as a younger guy. And, like, honestly, like, the one thing I came away from watching him at development camp is he definitely had skill. There were times he could, like, turn it on a little bit and you would see it. And puck possession wise, he had a pretty good shot. Like, there were tools there that were definitely good. But, like, I didn't like his compete at development camp. I didn't like, he was giving up on drills before the whistle at times, that he wasn't like playing all, there were certain things he was doing. Like, he would disappear for stretches when he was doing like scrimmages and the 3-on-3 stuff and things like that. That's the stuff that like needs to change. Like, he needs to become much more, and that can be like something that happens, I feel like, with guys that are that big too, like where it comes a little easier to them. And they're used to just physically dominating kids that are way smaller than them. And maybe even at times being told to go easy on kids that are like a foot shorter than them, when they're playing against them, where like that kid needs to like dial it up all the time now and realize that it's a whole different level of expectation. And everybody he's against now is really good and needs to go full balls to the wall the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it'll be interesting to see where he's placed in the BC lineup coming up this year. And like I said, he needs to turn it on a little bit, but give him another year before we say he's a bust.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into Providence real quick. I don't know how closely you've been following it, but they were down 2-0. They won, and Ryan Mougenel kind of challenged them a little bit. Like, he wanted to see them start playing like a man after they lost game 2 in Providence, which is pretty strong. But like, I like that Mougenel kind of says what he's thinking and isn't afraid to challenge guys when they need it. And they responded. They won game 3 in Charlotte. Riley Tufte had a couple of goals. He's actually one of the leading scorers in these playoffs. Yeah. And it's funny when you look down the list, it's a who's who of, guys with NHL experience all the way down the line, just like those veteran AHL types that are now down there. And Tufte was in there. But like, it's been a good, I think it's a good development piece for the young players. And a lot of them, I think some have done well. I think Matt Poitras been very good. Some have not. Fabian Lysell, I think, has 1 point in like 6 games. Yeah. And I think some of the stuff that Mougenel was saying after that game too was directed a little bit towards him. I think it was towards a lot of the young players or in general as a group. But I think you could see it most with Lysell. Like, he's a guy that I think at this point we can make a determination on now, even though he looked okay at times, like in garbage time at the end of the regular season in the NHL. When you put him in a situation in the AHL where it's high intensity against really good players motivated on the other side, and it gets a little physical, like he just disappears. You don't really see him at all.
Yeah, is this his first playoff? He's been hurt the last couple of years.
I think it might be.
Yeah.
He was hurt last year, right?
Yeah. I think he was hurt the 2 years.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, this is a growth experience for him. We'll see if he gets to the other side of it. I guess I haven't watched the games. I've been watching the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yep.
But it sounds like Minton has been a strong player for them. Just maybe not. He may not be a top 6 guy, but right. A good solid player.
Yes, and it was very telling to me, like a lot of parallels that Don Sweeney was making between Minton and Charlie Coyle at the end of the season when he was talking about Minton, and I think that's the expectation they have for him as kind of a third line center, sort of does some of the small detailed work, important though to winning, that Charlie Coyle does. And Minton's a guy, I noticed it in the games that I watched in Providence, and I think it was the same in game 3 in Charlotte. Takes a lot of the D-zone faceoffs, especially late in the game when it's important that they win them. And, there's certain situations that he's getting put into that are high leverage, high important, that tells you there's a lot of trust there, that he's going to get the job done and that he knows how to perform in those situations. So I think that all of that bodes well for him, like getting a long look at the NHL level next year and him, playing a role with the Bruins. because they certainly know they need to find somebody that's going to fill that Charlie Coyle role as a third line center that's dependable, that can pop one in every once in a while. Isn't like electric, but like is just a solid player.
Yeah, I'd like to see them find somebody who can replace the Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci role.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. You're right.
That one's a little tougher to replace, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't strike me as a kid who will take anything for granted.
No.
So, I was impressed by him, in his time, the very short time with the Bruins. I thought he might stay all, for the whole season down in Providence, but I'm glad he got a taste of, playing in Boston. But yeah, he strikes me as a good guy who'll be able to kill penalties, do all those little things that, the unglamorous, parts of the game. But we'll see, a guy who is good on his details may, find a scoring touch. So, I don't want to put a a ceiling on him, say that, no, he's a third line center,
right.
But, we'll see. I've liked what I've seen from him.
Yeah, and I think he's going to be one of those players. I think even Joe Sacco alluded to that a lot, that like he puts himself in the areas where good things are going to happen. He's a tough kid who doesn't mind going to the front of the net and going into the slot area and battling to get there. And like all that stuff is going to translate, especially if he's playing with good players, and good wingers if he's playing center. That'll translate into some offense for him. I don't think he's like a dynamic line driving sort of center, though. Like
probably not
that kind of a guy. But that's okay. Like, you don't always need that, especially if they have talented wings. Let's take a break real quick. I will say before we go, though, that Patra, I think, has been very good. Like, he's generated a lot of offense. There's been ups and downs with him, but I've really liked him and liked what I've seen. I didn't watch the first game against Charlotte, which I guess he was a -4. So I missed a game where he was, like, rough and not good at all. And it's a good Charlotte team. They've got a bunch of guys that have NHL pedigree, so it's a good challenge for them. But I think Patra's been good and given me no reason to think he's not going to be a part of the NHL picture next year. And the other guy that I've really liked, and Brunet's been good on the back end and continues to get better. I like him a lot.
They need something. They need some filler.
Yes.
Somebody who's ready to jump in.
I like him a lot more now than I liked him like at the beginning of the year when I'd seen him in the past. Like, I think he's much more well-rounded as a defenseman now. Michael Callahan is really good at the AHL level and looks like he's going to be a guy. I mean, maybe this is why the Bruins aren't like all in on bringing back Jokiharju or haven't been like completely enthusiastic about it yet, is that they feel like they want to keep Callahan and have him as like either a bottom pairing guy or a seventh defenseman next year. And that they feel like he's kind of earned a spot because like he was solid in Boston, obviously, no frills, meat and potatoes, stay at home kind of guy.
Yeah.
But like he does that and even a little bit more at the AHL level and looks like one of the best players every time he's out there. Certainly the best defenseman for Providence and kind of looks like he's NHL ready.
Yeah. I don't see him as a top 4 guy. No. Maybe he's a guy that, when the game is on the line and you need a solid stay-at-home defenseman, maybe he can play that role.
Yep.
But as a regular top 4 guy, I'm not sure he's that guy. But definitely, I think he could be a third pairing guy and certainly a 17 man.
Yeah, no question. All right, let's take a break real quick. For those of you listening to the episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all of this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right. Let's move on to the next topic. This is a question from FlashDog88. Are there any of this year's playoff head coaches that may become available that would interest the Bruins? DeBoer, Cooper, Bednar, etc. And I asked that question or read that comment while also like giving the updates of Joe Quenneville hired by the Anaheim Ducks, Mike Sullivan hired by the New York Rangers, David Carl not leaving the University of Denver and staying in the college ranks. Rick Tocchet is a name that's out there and interesting. And I think, he played with Cam and Donnie, and I think he could qualify for that like circle of trust that I think they're going to want to have with whatever coach they hire. I feel like this is going to be somebody, they're not going to bring in somebody necessarily from the outside as much as I think they want to have somebody that there's a level of trust with and a level of confidence with, and kind of is sort of part of the Bruins way of doing things. And I think, Tocchet could be an interesting guy in that regard. What do you think makes the most sense at this point? And who do you think are the strongest candidates, knowing that they're still, I think, pretty early on in the search process at this point?
Yeah, I don't think Pete DeBoer is going to be available.
No.
But I think
be interesting.
There could be somebody on DeBoer's staff that they could be interested in. That's Misha Donskov. He was, was assistant on Bruce Cassidy's staff when Vegas won the Cup. Has done succeeded at pretty much every level. He's an interesting name, and Don Sweeney had him on his staff for the Four Nations team for Canada. Yep. So that's obviously a name to look out for. Cooper, I don't know if he's going back to Tampa, but something tells me he's not just leaving Tampa to become a free agent. I think he kind of would have his landing spot already set.
A la Mike Sullivan.
Yeah. So in Bednar, they already said Chris McFarland already said that Bednar is coming back.
Yep.
So in Tocchet, he's obviously a well-respected guy. There was I don't know if he could have, eased the situation any better in Vancouver between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson. Who knows? I mean, that's so rare that there's a situation where two guys just can't make it work, can't figure it out.
Yep.
And I can understand why JT Miller would be frustrated with Elias Pettersson, because I've seen so many times when Vancouver has come to town and he's just been a ghost.
Yep.
Pettersson.
Yep.
So, yeah, maybe he could have done a better job of finding a way to make that work, but it didn't. But he's had some success elsewhere. He had a little success last year in Vancouver. So I had thought that he was either a Pittsburgh guy or a Philly guy to me. But we'll see.
Anybody else? Marco Sturm is another one.
Marco's another name.
He's a guy that I think has paid his dues.
Yeah.
NHL assistant. He's done a really good job with the Kings AHL team in Ontario. He is another one that would be in the Bruins circle of trust, having played for them, and having played with a lot of the guys that are that won the Cup in 2011, and has a connection to the people running the organization now. And I really think that's going to be a part of it. Like, I think and you mentioning Don Sweeney working with the guy at Four Nations, like there's going to be some kind of connections there like that, I think, for the next guy that they bring in. And I think part of it might just be like, the way things sort of worked out with Jim Montgomery, who was a guy that was kind of on the outside and not really a known quantity, I think, with a lot of the people running the show here, is I think over time, maybe they, felt like they wanted something different than that. And they were maybe surprised by some things or weren't on the same page with everything. And I feel like they want to bring somebody in that there's a free-flowing understanding of who they are and what they're all about before they get here.
Yeah, and that's part of doing your due diligence. You have to be comfortable with the guy that you're bringing in, and it certainly seems like Don Skov would be that guy with Sweeney having already worked with them at the Four Nations.
Yeah.
So we'll see. And I would imagine that Don Skov would be a fairly hot commodity.
Yep.
And there's going to be some competition.
What do you think about, some of the people in the organization now? Do you feel like there's any chance that any of them would get the gig, or that they should go outside of, Jay Leach, Ryan Mujanel, assistants on the NHL staff, Joe Sacco being a part, like all that stuff. It feels like to me they need to go outside of that to bring somebody in, somebody that they're connected with, somebody they have trust in, somebody they want for the job. But I'm not sure bringing somebody from the current, group that they have in the organization would be the right move.
Yeah, that might be a tough sell after the season that they had. It wouldn't shock me if one or two of those guys stick around on the staff.
No. Yep.
And I don't think it would be a bad thing.
Yep.
But yeah, I do think that this to me, where they are right now, screams, that they should get a young coach who's going to grow with some of the young players that they're going to have in this on this lineup for the next few years.
Yeah, no question. All right, this one is from Green Highlander, and this is a Boston Sports Journal Q&A question, but I liked this. So it's a two-parter. Can we all finally acknowledge, and we'll go one question at a time. Can we all finally acknowledge that Monty is a fine coach in the regular season, but wilts under the pressure of the playoffs? And look, 6-on-5 goalie pulled situations were an issue with the Bruins the entire time he was here. It was a huge issue for the Blues this year during the regular season. It was a big issue, obviously, for the Blues in that Game 7. And these are the reasons why the Bruins were very hesitant. This and the too many men on the ice penalties that they would take and some of the chaos that seemed to be happening on the bench. There was different things that you saw, and him getting outmaneuvered by Paul Maurice in the two series that they played against each other. There was different things that you saw with Montgomery, especially under the playoff pressure, like Cooker microscope, that didn't inspire confidence that there was going to change and that they should invest in him in a long-term situation with the Bruins because there were problems there. There were concern areas that just weren't fixed.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, he was one spectacular David Pastrnak goal from getting fired at the end of last season.
Yep.
That would have been 2 years in a row where they blew a 3-1 lead.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think Montgomery is an excellent coach.
Yes.
who needs to get over this hump. I don't know if he's going to get there, but this is a block that he's got to get past. And I don't know what he did wrong, what he does wrong on the on these situations. Maybe in Boston, maybe he didn't use David Pastrnak enough on the 6-on-5.
Yeah,
but I mean, having a goal scorer on the ice, you don't sell out for an empty net goal, but those guys seem to have a knack for being able to find that empty net.
They do, and they also have a different level of confidence, I think, with the puck in those situations.
Yeah.
That, some other guys do, where they're just panicking with it as soon as they get it. And, either firing it into somebody on the other team or whatever, there's a different level of noise, I think, with guys like that.
The guys like Derek Forbut who stand there and take shots off the face and all that, but it's not good strategy to be a shooting gallery in a 6-on-5. That's not the object of it. You want to end the game, and his teams just have not been able to do that.
And some of it I don't know is X's and O's, Steve. Some of it I think is also sort of the poise of the coach in those situations, or his determination, or the way he's addressing the team, or the way he's acting on the bench. I think there's some element to that. When it keeps happening over and over again, I think there's some element of tightness on the bench carrying over to players being tight on the ice. And especially as it perpetuates and as it, happens more and more, it becomes a bigger weight. And I think there's something to that as well. I think there's been instances where, it seemed like his teams were too tight in the playoffs. And, that comes from somewhere. That doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, I remember when they were up 3-1, they might have been a little too loose, and then they got too tight.
Yes. Yep.
So, yeah, I don't have the answer as to why he's failed, whether it's his demeanor on the bench. He's a little high strung. and that works in an 82 game schedule, obviously, because he's
Yep.
had phenomenal success in the
Yep.
regular season. But yeah, I mean, he needs to get over this hump. He needs to figure it out, and I think he does so well in the regular season. He will get chance. He will have a lot more chances to do this.
Yep. And if he's going to do it, like St. Louis is the kind of team he's going to do it with, because that's the roster is tailored to the way he wants to play. There's a lot of offensive skill there. There's a lot of playmaking, that short passing, puck possession, the way he wants to play. I think there's a lot of players on that roster that will flourish and will continue to do well with the style that he likes to employ. It's just a matter of whether that works in the playoffs or not, and it hasn't to this point. All right. The other question, a lot of the teams drafting ahead of the Bruins are young. What do you think of offering a package centered around Hampus Lindholm to acquire one of the higher picks? The history of players returning to pre-injury form is far from guaranteed. The Bees can use this additional cap space for the upcoming season. I mean, I think that's interesting. I don't think they're going to do it, because I think a lot of what they're hoping is for a bounce back season. And that's what they're expecting, I think, to a large degree, is that they're going to bounce back from last year if they make the right moves, make the right acquisitions, have some really good decisions and a really good offseason. And Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy being the two pillars on the back end, I think, are a big part of that. I mean, I was a little surprised by this, but maybe I shouldn't have been. It seemed to me, when we had the end of season breakup day with the players, there was a lot of mention from a lot of different players, especially the influential ones, about how important Hampus Lindholm was as a leader, and how important they were going to rely on him to be one of the leaders of this team. And it almost spoke to me of he's going to get a letter next year based on the talk and what I heard. And I found that interesting. I found that very telling. But I
found it a little surprising as well.
Well, totally. But
he seems like nothing seems to bother him. He reminds me a lot of Joe Thornton.
Yeah, go with the flow kind of guy. Yeah, totally. But maybe they need a little bit of that. I don't know. The one thing I will say, though, is I think there is some level of concern with a guy that had an injury, had a re-injury, and I know they talked about it just being a screw that was irritating the area and all that stuff. But I think there's got to be some level of concern going into this year about unknown with that player since he didn't come back to play.
Yeah, the problem is you'd be selling low on him.
Yep.
Because everybody knows he's coming back from a major knee injury.
Yep.
And two, they're already down a top four defenseman after trading Brandon Carlo.
Yep.
So obviously they think they're going to compete this year. Assuming that they land a couple of guys in free agency that will help, a couple of wings it looks like they're targeting. That they'll be able to compete. We'll see. I think they should be able to compete for a playoff spot, but it'll go right down to the wire, because I think they have a lot of holes.
They definitely do, and there's a hope. There's a lot of hope involved. There's hope in guys
absolutely.
bouncing back. There's hope in Swayman bouncing back and being the player that he was before, and that everything has been sort of addressed or fixed in the locker room that might have been going on. All of that stuff, I think there's a lot that has to go right for the Bruins to be in the playoffs next year. I think they're banking on a lot of it happening, and a lot of it could happen and should happen. But you're really not going to know until they get out there and start playing games and they're put back into that pressure cooker exactly how everybody's going to fit. I think in hindsight, you could say that Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov both turned out to be the players you thought they were going to be. But it took them a long time to get there, and it took a lot of a learning curve and, wins and losses and mistakes and a lot of stuff happening that impacted the season negatively before they finally got there. And that happens whenever you bring in big free agents that are expected to play a big role, that it can take them a while to get used to the system, the players they're playing with, everything. There's a curve there.
Yeah. The interesting thing is the back injury with Lindholm. How much did that, really affect him? He was on the ice, okay? So you give him some leeway, but not all that much.
Yep.
So that's a big thing. If he can come in and play like he played towards the end, it wasn't spectacular. It wasn't anybody's idea of a line driving first line center,
No.
but he was good. He allowed that. He helped that line, do what they needed to do to be a real first line. You got two shooters in Pasternak and Geeky, and he facilitated. He was the defensive conscience for both of them, and allowed them to do their thing.
Anybody that you like in particular as far as the free agent wingers that might be available? There's obviously the big names, guys like Besser and Marner, and I know there's one other one I'm forgetting right now.
Ehlers,
thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody in particular you like or gravitate towards?
I mean, I don't know if I don't think the Bruins would be all that attractive to Marner. I don't know. He's right wing. He'd be on a second line behind David Pasternak.
Yep.
And he probably looks at this line and says, "Who's going to be my centerman here?"
Yep.
So that seems like a pipe dream, but money is money, and the Bruins have it right now. And he would be a guy that I wouldn't hesitate to throw the bag at.
No.
Because he's been a terrific player, and for some reason he's been the fall guy for that core four more often than not. With the fans up there.
Yep.
So I don't know. Maybe if they make a run, maybe it becomes a kumbaya moment up there, and everybody wants to come back. So maybe he never gets to free agency. I remember a few years ago, everyone was waiting for Steven Stamkos to become a free agent, and then 2 days before free agency starts, he re-signed.
Yep.
It's not this last deal, but the deal before that. So it's kind of tough to bank on that. But Ehlers is a good guy. Besser, I don't think he's a real first line guy, but he'd help. But there are players out there. I don't know if they can really totally rebuild through free agency.
No, they definitely can't. They need to find some goal scoring though. That's for sure.
Yeah.
DeBrusk having left 2 years ago and Marchand gone this past season, that's a lot of offense on the wing that you've lost in the last 2 years. That you definitely need to replace. And the Marner thing, like, you're right. He definitely would be the second line right wing. But if you're a team like the Bruins that's having a hard time finding legit top six centers to replace the centers that you had, you just may have to do it a different way and have line driving right wingers on each of your top.
Yeah, and Marner is that guy.
Yes.
He is the line driver.
Yep. Yeah, he plays a lot like a center, just like Pasternak. They, they play wing technically, but they do a lot of center-like things once the puck is dropped, and it's all the rage.
Once it's over the offensive blue line, they act like a center.
Yes, it's all the rage these days, Steve, in USA Hockey when you take the coaching clinics that they like to talk about positionless hockey now. That's what it is, positionless hockey, where once it's dropped, everybody can play everywhere. You got forwards covering for D, you got wingers playing center, all that stuff. It's all about free-flowing creativity when they're teaching the young kids these days. So
and as Don Sweeney says, they're looking for a guy who needs to evolve offensively.
Yes, let's do that. Let's find some evolving offensive players. All right, Steve, thank you very much for joining us. Let's also remind you that you're listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, and we ask you to subscribe to the podcast, like and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interweb. Steve Conroy, thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.
Everybody else out there, thanks for listening. We'll see you at the rink.